A very good evening and welcome to another episode of South Africa Today and Beyond. In studio this evening, I'm joined by Mfanafuthi, Tsela, the Deputy President of Pidemo, the People's United Democratic Movement in Swaziland. Come in, Mfanafuthi, welcome on the show.
Welcome, thanks, Kwara, and welcome to the viewers.
Sure. I think maybe let's engage the viewers and let's just, for the benefit of the viewers that don't know, what is Pidemo? Is it a political party? Is it a liberation movement? What is Pidemo?
Pidemo is, I would say it is a political party, but at the same time it is a liberation movement because, as you know, that Swaziland is a dictatorship. So political parties are banned, but at the same time it is a political party that even when Swaziland is democratic, it means it's going to participate in the governing of the country. Yes. It is both a political party, but it's also like a liberation movement of Swaziland.
Sure. There have been multiple calls calling for, I think, number one, I mean, Swaziland is an absolute monarch. Yeah. And it's facing quite a lot of challenges. And among those, I mean, is the current political situation that's currently, that it's plunging Swaziland as a country. The one, I mean, really take us through what are some of the demands. When people are saying they call for a democratic Swaziland, a multi-party Swaziland, what does that really mean?
I think as you said, that the Swaziland is an absolute monarch. What that means is that all of the powers, like parliament, the legislative powers, the executive powers, and even the judicial powers are under the king as an individual. So for Swazis, or for, like if we talk about now in modern world, you cannot expect that one individual can have all of those powers, because in a democratic society like this, even the checks and balances, like the executive is the legislator is like able to check what the executive is doing, and also the judicial. So in Swaziland, all of the powers are invested in one individual.
And in terms of the multi-party, I think, calls also as well, what does that really entail? And when we talk about also demand for democracy, insofar as I think the people on the ground, the liberation movements like Pidemo, but also other solidarity organizations as well, some of the more progressive trade unions within Swaziland as well are calling for a multi-party democratic system in Swaziland. What does that really mean? Because, I mean, for one, there are elections that take place every 5 years. So maybe take us through what characterizes the elections and what is so problematic about the current system?
I think the worst part of the system in Swaziland is that, first of all, political parties are banned, like 1973. Because Swaziland used to have a constitution, a Westminster constitution, which was, when Swaziland got independence, there was a Westminster constitution, which was the democratic constitution. So after 1976, 1973, when the king abolished, in fact, removed the constitution, like he banned political parties. So even if you talk about elections today, those elections are, you go as an individual, you cannot go as a political party or as an organization. But the parliament, at the end of the day, doesn't have the powers, because the powers are with the king at the end of the day, and he's the one who appoints the executive. He's the one, like, they cannot make law. He appoints his own people in parliament, and the lower parliament is the House of Assembly, and then there's the Senate. Like most of the people, he appoints his own people. So the people are in minority, the ones who are voted. But at the end of the day, they don't have powers, because for every law to become a law, he's the one who's supposed to agree and sign it. So there's no democracy at all. And when we talk about elections, people just go there. You cannot even campaign. It's illegal to campaign in the elections. You just show your hand. You just show your hand, and then people would appoint you.
And I'm curious, Mfanafuthi, I mean, insofar as individuals, I mean, availing themselves for public office, as you put it, can anybody do that, or is it also certain people that are not allowed, even though it's not within the it's not legally said that you're not? For example, somebody like yourself, as a Swati national, can you avail yourself public office?
You can. I think people have to nominate you. There's a number of people who can nominate you, but what happens is that, because as you know, that Swaziland is a feudal system. So there are chieftains all over Swaziland, there are chiefs, and for you to be able to stand for the elections, you have to come from a chief, from a chieftaincy. The chief have to agree that you are subject, and so that is where it starts. Then you are going to compete with the individual from another chieftains, you know. And what happens is that first of all, the chieftains are not the same, even in terms of sizes. So it means that people who come from the bigger chieftains are most likely to win. And as I say, that there is that influence of the chiefs. The chiefs are part of an extension of the monarchy. So people who are, I would say, progressive, they're unlikely to win because the chiefs still have got a lot of influence.
But now, in Mfanafuthi, these individuals must be affirmed by the king, King Musati himself?
It doesn't have to affirm them, but because it starts at the chieftains level, because Swaziland, they call the system Tinkhulda system. It's got about, Tinkhulda, what it means is just like some constituencies. And there are 55 constituencies in Swaziland. So, and under each and every constituency, there would be chieftaincies. One would be 4, one would be 7, whatever. It depends. So it's the chiefs that have got the power. I mean, the extent, as I said, it's the extension of the monarch. It's the chiefs that will be able to influence, because
sure.
like what happens today is that the king also can remove a chief. It's not just a chief is supposed to be born like what is supposed to be cultural, but a king can remove a chief, and he has been removing chiefs, sometimes putting his brother. So the chief has got to do what the king wants, you know.
I
so
mean,
it is able to influence the politics, yes.
So in 1973, we see under King Sobhuza II,
Yeah.
the banning of all political parties in Swaziland. In 1983, then we have Pidemo that is essentially formed.
Yes.
And I mean, Pidemo then operates as sort of a political party. How do you then operate under a system where political parties are then have been banned? And this decision has not been repealed up until today. So political parties, in essence, are still banned in Swaziland in 2017.
Yes. In fact, it's very difficult for Pidemo, because Pidemo has been operating like, first it used to operate as an underground movement, like where you mobilize people. It's totally underground. They used to have a law called 60 days detention in Swaziland, where they just like, if they suspect that you against the king, they just put you in prison. After 60 days, they just renew it and renew it. Stay as long as they want. So if you discuss politics, I'll just say if you discuss politics, you don't have to have some evidence or whatever. So Pidemo has been operating under very difficult conditions since then. But it was only in 1990 where Pidemo decided to unban itself. Like, a number of Pidemo members were caught and they were charged with treason, like trying to overthrow the state, which was not true. And after that, Pidemo decided that they're going to defiantly operate above ground, you know. But they're still illegal. It's still illegal to belong to a political party. So that is what's been happening. But the worst part is that Pidemo now, while parties are illegal, but Pidemo has also been prescribed as a terrorist organization. Like Pidemo is doing Swayoko, and even SSN, which is based in South Africa, it has also been prescribed as a terrorist organization. So it's even more difficult now to operate, you know. People are arrested. People have been detained just for wearing a Pidemo T-shirt or having a document which has written Pidemo. That is a crime in Swaziland today. So it's very difficult. Like, Pidemo is operating under very difficult conditions, but that has not deterred the activists who are fighting for democracy. People have been arrested. People have been in jail. Even today, people are in jail. Some are out of jail. I will give you an example. Somebody said in a rally, passing Mswati, and the person was imprisoned, you know, for saying that, like, it's still like having a case, like a sedition case. People have been, like, someone was wearing a T-shirt, like, written Pidemo, and he was imprisoned, and they killed him inside prison. So it's a very difficult situation. Like, people may not understand the extent to which Swazis are living under, because you will hear people say, oh, at least Swazis love the king. They don't have a choice. You have to love the king. If you don't love the king, you might be imprisoned, whatever. So it's not that people love this king, but it's under the situation which the regime is operating.
Again, comment Mfanafuthi, I mean, we talk about the current political climate. People are simply arrested for wearing a Pidemo t-shirt or yelling slogans like "Down with the King," for example, are simply imprisoned, and some, are then killed in prison. And then, how is Pidemo organizing itself internally in Swaziland today? How are you able to organize?
I think in 2008. They after prescribing Pidemo as a terrorist organization, it became more difficult than before, So it's very difficult now for Pidemo to operate. It's so difficult in such a situation that sometimes people, just to hold a meeting, sometimes people have to come to South Africa because we have been arrested. So Pidemo has had to change its strategy. Again, like how it operates, like it's difficult to call rallies now, but that doesn't mean that Pidemo doesn't call rallies. They still call rallies, but what it means is that somebody else will be imprisoned for that. It's so Pidemo has also have been able also to work in civil society, civil organizations. But people are known that to be Pidemo. The civil society today is more progressive. It's also calling for democracy. Trade unions are also calling for democracy. So Pidemo is working under a very difficult situation. Yeah.
Sure. I want us to go for a quick ad break. When we come back, I want to talk about maybe the support that Pidemo is getting from different organizations within the SADC region. I know BNF also has lended its support to Pidemo, the African National Congress as well. COSATU as well is one of the biggest federations that has come out calling on the support for Pidemo, but also calling for democracy in Swaziland. So let's go for a quick ad break and we'll have that conversation when we come back. Welcome from the ad break, and in studio I'm still joined by Mfanafuthi Tsela, who is the Deputy President of Pidemo, a Swaziland official opposition party, but also a liberation movement in Swaziland. Mfanafuthi, before the ad break, we're talking about some of the conditions in which Pidemo is forced to adapt, and in terms of organizing, because it becomes so increasingly difficult to organize, and because the regime has become increasingly, repressive in terms of those who are outspoken against, I think, the king and the monarch itself. But insofar as the kind of support that Pidemo is receiving on the continent, give us a sense of the kind of support that you guys are getting on the ground in the various countries.
I think one of the things which we have been able to do is to internationalize our struggle, so we have been able to get support from people from different countries, and both here in Africa, in Southern Africa, in the region, but even abroad. We've been able to get support. Even people have organized themselves outside Pidemo, non-Swazis, to render support to Pidemo, but also some organizations have been able to support Pidemo. In Southern Africa, for instance, in South Africa, we've got a very big presence. The issue of Swaziland is a big issue, particularly in the tripartite alliance. Which the Communist Party have been very supportive. COSATU and the ANC have been very supportive. But even in other countries, in Botswana, we've got support from Botswana. We've got some relationship with the BNF. Even beyond, we've got relationships with organizations even in the first world in Europe. We've got a very good relationship, for instance, with the Red Green Alliance in Denmark. Some of those countries, like in Denmark today, in Parliament they discuss Swaziland. In fact, in northern Europe, like in Sweden, in Finland, Swaziland is becoming an issue in such a way that even in the European Parliament today, Swaziland is being discussed. So we have been able to form relationships. In Southern Africa, for instance, the Swaziland Solidarity Network, which is formed by South Africans. But it's not only in South Africa, we've got it in Europe, we've got it in Canada, we've got it in the US. And we also got Swazis. Swazis are not only found, like Swazis who have been exiled out of their country. You've got Swazis here in South Africa, mostly are in South Africa, but you find some people also in Europe, like in particular in the UK. So those people have always also been able to organize and push our struggle forward.
Sure. And speaking of exile, and I know you yourself and many other leaders as well are living in exile in different parts of, I think, Africa, but also in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
You yourself are living in South Africa as an exile. Maybe, how long have you been staying in South Africa and living in exile? And also, what were the conditions of you having to leave Swaziland, your homeland?
Before I left Swaziland, I was, I've been an activist of Pidemo and the broader liberation movement in Swaziland. And I've been detained a number of times, many times. And it came to a situation where my life was threatened. And they wanted to kill me. And I was able to run away from Swaziland. And I left Swaziland, it's about 19 years ago. I've been living in South Africa for about 19 years. I've not been able to go back home. But there are people who have been in exile even longer than me. Some have been in exile since 1984. So, and there are many people who have, even after I've left, like they've been like, more people have been forced to. It's one of the things maybe the regime is trying to do, like is to force activists out of the country, like to pressurize them, eventually leave the country. So it's one of the difficulties which we have to pay. It's one of the prices we have to pay as people who are opposed to the king. Yeah.
Sure. Mfanafuthi, I know in 1973, Swaziland declared a state of emergency. And up until today, there is still a state of emergency, which is by far one of the longest state of emergencies in the world. Maybe explain to our viewers what, in essence, the impact of the state of emergency on ordinary Swatis in Swaziland.
What it did, because as I said earlier, that the king removed the constitution, abrogated the independence constitution, which was having the rights, the basic rights, the Bill of Rights, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, all of those freedoms. And they removed that constitution, and it means people no longer had those freedoms. And what happened, as you know, that Swaziland is still like a rural country, and it's a feudal country. Like one of the rights which they removed from the constitution was they removed the Bill of Rights, which, for instance, would give someone the right to property. And most of the Swazis are staying still under the traditional chieftains. And what they would say is that they say, just if you don't want the king, the chief would tell you, if you don't want the king, just go to your own land. And during the period of 1973, maybe to 1978, there were a lot of Swazis who were evicted from, in particular people who were supporting the opposition then, were evicted from their areas. And they were left destitute. And that brought a lot of fear to many Swazis, like that they cannot longer discuss politics. And I think that was one of the main impact of the state of emergency. But as I said, that they used to have also, there was a 60 days detention order, which people were just like imprisoned. In particular, the leaders of opposition were imprisoned. And the king would, because the king was having his political party before 1973. So the king would appoint his own people, like his cronies or his friends or his relatives, like to positions of power. Like so, since 1976, since 1973, the Swazis have not been able to have a say in their government.
And I mean, insofar as the socio-economic impact of the state of emergency, what has then been like? For example, you know, Swaziland has got one of the highest HIV infection rates in the world. And of course, I mean, we've heard stories about how those who are on ARVs, for example, have to have eaten mud or cow dung to supplement the taking of the ARVs. And those are some of the, I mean, the state of destituteness, if you will, of some of the Swatis on the ground. And that's perhaps, has that also been the direct impact of the state of emergency and the state of the current political climate in Swaziland?
I think that is exactly what has happened, because like what happens in Swaziland is not a poor country. Swaziland is a middle income country, which means like it's supposed to be better than some of the African countries. You know, most of them are lower income, like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, all of them. Swaziland is a middle income country, but the rate of poverty, like they say about 75 or 70% to 75% of Swazis live under the poverty line. Like what it means is that the income in Swaziland, most of the income is held by very, very few people. It's those who are linked to the king. As I'm telling you now today, like Swaziland has got a budget of less than like 15 billion. Like it's like in South Africa. If you talk about South Africa, it's like maybe a quarter or less than a quarter of the city of Johannesburg. Like is the budget, but the king's budget, the royal household budget, is over $1 billion. Today it's like 1.6. This year is 1.6 billion. Like I'm talking about just like on the budget, like on government income. Most of it goes to the king. Not that the king does not have access to the budget from the other ministries. They still going to have access. So what would you expect from that? Like it becomes very difficult for the state to provide, whether it's for health or whatever, like because most Swazis now are living under like aid. They get foreign, like food they get is coming from aid. But as I said, that Swaziland is a middle income country. It's not supposed to be like that. And in fact, in the issue of HIV positive, it's not that Swaziland is one of the highest in the world. It is the highest. Like it is the highest. And in other countries like Botswana, you would see like Botswana has also been up there. But you can see that the intervention of government have shown like a big change. But in Swaziland, because of the manner of the government, the type of government, the king's government, we have not been able to turn around. Swaziland still remains the country which is worst hit by HIV.
Now, as we draw to a close with this conversation, what becomes the way forward, Mfanafuthi, in terms of the demands from the people on the ground, the demands of Pidemo as well, but also how can ordinary South Africans lend a hand of solidarity to the people of Swaziland that are calling for democratic systems in Swaziland?
I think for us, like the best thing, like what we would like to see is, because as I said earlier, that we have already been receiving a lot of solidarity, but what we receive is solidarity from people. We don't receive solidarity, like for instance, from organizations like SADC. Today, in fact, SADC, like the king is the chairperson of SADC, you know. Like even in South Africa, you will find that organizations like the ANC, for instance, they took some very progressive positions about Swaziland. But when it comes to government level, like the government is doing the opposite, you know. So we don't get that support we would like to get, like on the institution. So we would like people to make their governments, not just in South Africa, but other countries in the region, like to have the governments also participate, like to be able to democratize, to intervene in the region of Swaziland. But we would also like appreciate more support, like from the people in South Africa, like people to understand like the extent of the way Swazis live.
Sure. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. And I certainly hope that as things develop in Swaziland, but also as things develop within Pidemo as well, both I think in South Africa as well, and inside Swaziland as well, as we're seeing people also coming out and speaking out, the different social movements that are speaking out against the king. We'll be observing the situation quite closely, and we hope that we can invite Pidemo again onto the show to come and speak to us about those developments. Thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thanks, Kwara.
Sure. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for you tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and tune in next week. Have a good evening.